What's happening? What's good? What's going on? Part of my presence YouTube channel, I want to talk about LeBron James' son, Bronny James, who apparently had a cardiac arrest while training with his University of Southern California basketball team on July 24th. Now, it was a regular routine basketball practice. They were preparing to go on a trip to Europe for a basketball tournament where he collapsed on the court. He had to be resuscitated. They called 911. They took him to Cedars-Sinai Hospital, the nearest hospital, where he was stabilized, and then he was eventually released from intensive care. Now, I know what everyone's thinking, which is the obvious, is the fact that Bronny James is only 18 years old. And being that he is the son of LeBron James, which is a physical specimen, he's the symbolism of longevity, good health, being intentional with exercising in your eating habits and dieting. He is someone who rarely is injured. He usually plays all season. He usually plays 40 plus minutes per game. He is someone that has no signs of slowing down at his age in the league. So for his son to have these heart issues, it is odd. And to my knowledge, Bronny James doesn't have any pre-existing heart conditions. So for this to happen at 18 years old, knowing that typically someone who has a cardiac arrest or has heart problems like a heart attack, they usually have that later in life, like around 50 to 60 years old. So for this to happen to Bronny James at this age, a lot of people are pointing to the jab and whether or not Bronny James took the jab and if that was the reason for his collapse. Now, first of all, Bronny James' medical history and records are none of our business. We'll never have access to them, so we can never confirm whether or not he's taken the jab. But one thing that we do know is that USC does not have a policy that requires students to take the jab in order to attend their school programs or to attend their sporting teams. So if there is no mandatory policy in place for that, and the fact that Bronny James is rich, his dad is rich, and if you remember initially, LeBron James had reservations about taking the jab initially, and then when he got pushback from a lot of people like Stephen A. Smith, then he came out saying that he's in support of it. Of course, he had to say that because he's the face of the league, but being that he's powerful and he has to pull, he probably made a deal saying, you know what, I won't speak out against the jab, I will be in favor of it, but you're not going to make me take it. And if he took that stance, he would have been well within his rights to negotiate that, considering how powerful he is and the brand that he is. But on top of that, if he has that type of reservation, I highly doubt that he would allow his 18-year-old son to be put in a position where he has to take that jab at such a young age without having children of his own yet, without determining how it's going to affect him in the future. I doubt he would have done that. So again, the speculation about this being the jab, I don't think LeBron James' son took the jab at all. And just to give you some stats, according to the CDC, about 2,000 young, seemingly healthy people under the age of 25 in the US die each year from sudden cardiac arrest, right? They also say that majority of the cardiac arrests occur in older adults, but there's no single major cause that puts any specific age group at risk. Now, here's the thing that I just want to point out here. It does say that common causes of cardiac arrest include heart attacks, heart disease, heart muscle inflammation. Now, they also say that people who suffer from high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, obesity, smokers, and substance abuse and inactive lifestyles are all at the highest risk. Now, when you look at all of those things that I mentioned, what can we associate Bronny James with? If you guess smoking, then you're absolutely correct, because Bronny James has been caught smoking marijuana at some point in time in his life. Although he's 18, he was caught, I think it was on social media, smoking weed. And if you know anything about the medical marijuana industry, the GMO weed and how they're growing things, it's not organic. It's not the same as, you know, the hills in the mountains in Jamaica where they grow the weed there. There's a lot of synthetic products that are added to this, a lot of chemicals, a lot of manipulation that goes on with the weed. I would think, and again, this is me being a conspiracy theorist, but not for the jab, but more for GMO weed. I would think if there was anything that could have brought this on, it could have been the marijuana, because we know that Bronny James smokes it, and we know that he's an athlete, and we know that many athletes believe that marijuana is good for you and has no health risks. It's not something that you could use that will give you an edge over other players. So a lot of sports teams and sporting organizations have actually been in favor of marijuana usage. But again, can that be the reason for Bronny James' cardiac arrest? Because we do know that GMO weed has a lot of issues in regards to how people react from it. A lot of people hallucinate. A lot of people end up having what they call psychotic episodes and psychosis. So these are the things that could be at play here. It should be noted that Bronny James is not the first athlete to have heart problems. Believe it or not, there have been many elite athletes who have continued to play professional sports even with their heart problems, and they've managed. But as well, there have been many professional athletes who, as a result of their heart problems, had to retire early and give up on the sport that they love. It should also be noted that there is a difference between a cardiac arrest and a heart attack. A cardiac arrest is when your heart stops pumping due to electrical malfunction, and it could happen all of a sudden. It's not something that can be predicted. Meanwhile, a heart attack is when you have a circulation problem within the arteries that get blocked or clogged due to cholesterol issues, right? Now, the one thing about a heart attack is that it's not something that happens all of a sudden. It could be a slow onset of symptoms that persist from hours to days, like chest pain and lightheadedness. So it's not something that happens all of a sudden like a cardiac arrest. Having said that, due to the unpredictable nature of cardiac arrest, you can see why people are concerned whether or not Bronny would ever make it to an elite level and play for the NBA, because there are two good examples as to why he probably shouldn't. One of them being the college basketball star Hank Gathers, who actually died on the basketball court during the game, and the other one being Boston Celtics star Reggie Lewis, who died from the same cardiac arrest issues during practice. Now, having said that, there are some success stories in the NBA of basketball players who've had heart issues and continued to play and have great careers. One of them being Jared Butler, who plays currently for Utah Jazz, and then you also have Jeff Green, who just won a basketball championship with the Denver Nuggets. So there are examples, especially in other sports, of athletes who've had heart issues who've gone on to continue their careers. In soccer, you have Christian Eriksen. In hockey, you have Chris Pronger. So you have people, including Keontae Johnson most recently. He collapsed during a basketball game in college, and he went on to get drafted by Oklahoma City Thunder for the 2023 NBA draft. So that's just recent. So there is a chance for Bronny to continue, but everybody's case is different, so they will have to assess whether or not it's in his best interest to continue playing basketball. And this is what I want to get into, because this is going to be a very difficult time for the James family to determine whether or not Bronny should continue, and there are many factors at play here. Now, the biggest factor is obvious. As much as people want to say they love competing, they love the camaraderie of their players, their teammates, and all that good stuff, that might sound great, but everybody knows the main reason why people get into sports and they get into elite sports and aspire to become professional athletes is because of the payday. They know that it could lead to generation change in the amount of wealth, and a lot of times the parents are in on it too, and that's why they push them to get into sports, because they know if my son could get drafted either number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or even the second round, no matter where he gets drafted in, if he makes a sport team, they're going to get a lot of money, and that could bring them out of poverty. That could change their circumstances for not only their immediate family but extended family. So that's the motivation. But in case of Bronny James, he's already rich. His father, LeBron, is already a billionaire. So that factor does not exist. So in other words, he doesn't have to sacrifice his health. He doesn't have to sacrifice his body. He doesn't have to put his life at risk for money, which is one of the biggest motivating factors as to why people become professional athletes. So that is not even in the picture. The other factor to consider is the LeBron James legacy. We all know that LeBron James is continuing to play in the NBA because he has hopes that one day he'll be able to play with his son on a professional basketball team. Other that would be a first across all sporting genres as far as a father and son playing at the same time. The only other duo I could think of is Ken Griffey Jr. and Ken Griffey Sr., but I'm not too sure if they ever played on the same team. But that is something that LeBron James has voiced as one of his motivations as to why he stayed in the league for so long. And the whole idea of Bronny going to college was to go there for 1 year and to get drafted right away. So that is also on the line as well too. And I know as much as LeBron James might be selfish and want that accolade, I don't think he will put his selfishness above his own son's health, right? Because there's no need for that. If you want to extend the LeBron James or the James brand, you have your other son, which is a great player. People say that he's even better than Bronny, right? So you have your other player, I believe his name is Bryce. So you have another son who could carry that torch if you want someone to play in the NBA, and Bronny could get into other different things. You already know he has interest in smoking weed, so he could grow his own medical marijuana company if he wants to do that. Bronny also plays video games. He could get into esports and he could get into gaming, because that's something that Chad Ochocinco has done. He's making money as well too. So there's different ways to further the James legacy and to build the brand. It could continue and it could go into so many different directions. And on top of that, if Bronny's not able to play again, he could get into the business side of sports, something that Maverick Carter has got into, something that I forget his name, something Paul, which is LeBron James' agent, has gotten into as well too. Sports agents. You could go into so many different arenas and further the LeBron brand, and you don't have to put your life on the line. So someone like Bronny, who has name recognition, who has already status, who already has fame, and who already is young enough to appeal to a younger demographic, there's so many different avenues that he could go where he could still live a motivating life. He could still live a life where he's able to follow different dreams, and he's also able to continue to live a long, healthy life by staying away from physical activities that will place him in danger. So I don't see why. Again, he doesn't need the money, he doesn't need to continue the legacy, and I don't think his father's going to place his interests above his son's. So really, there's no reason for him to continue. Now, in closing, one of the things I like to do is bring things back down to earth and find a way to have the situation more relatable to the everyday common man and woman. And the one thing I'll say about the Bronny James situation is that every parent and child, as they're growing up, they aspire to become professional athletes. And one of the things that people seem to forget is that it takes a lot of time, a lot of development, a lot of years to get to that point. It's just not people kicking the ball, just not people putting the ball in the basket or shooting the puck. It's more than that. It's the hours upon hours of practice. It's the hours upon hours of driving to different cities across Canada or across America for tournaments, for leagues, for different exhibitions, to make sure that your son or your daughter gets the recognition, has the visibility for the scouts. And a lot of times these kids are being recruited from the age of 9 years old, and they follow them up through high school. They're recruited to a high school, then they follow them all throughout high school, and they're recruited to a college, and then they follow all through college and they're recruited into professional sports. So this is something that takes a lot of people's time, blood, sweat, and tears. And I have to just pose this question to you. What other profession requires you to start studying and working on your path from the age of 9 years old? If you want to become a doctor, you can make that decision later on in life. If you want to become a lawyer, you can make that decision later on in life. If you want to become a politician, you can make that decision later on in life. You don't have to start at 9 years old and develop and train and work so hard to get any of those things done. So I have to ask you this question. Becoming a professional athlete, is it easier to become one than to become a doctor, than to become a lawyer, than to become a dentist or a carpenter, a plumber? No, it's not. It is actually very hard to become a professional athlete because not too many of all the ones that practice and that go to these leagues and that travel all across the city and the state, very few actually make it to the NBA. It's a chosen few, it's a select few. So I want people to realize that there's no cap on becoming a doctor. There's no cap on becoming a plumber. You can have so many plumbers. It doesn't even matter. There's so many lawyers out there to the point where people are ambulance chasers. That's what they call lawyers nowadays, right? So in other words, I'm trying to say here is that when it comes to professional sports, there is a cap. There's only a certain amount of people that could get drafted, right? There's only a certain amount of people that can make the teams. There's only a certain amount of slots. There's only a certain amount of a budget that a team has to pay players. So it's very limited and it's very selective. So you have to ask yourself, as a parent or as someone who is inspiring to be a professional athlete, does it make sense to continue in that path if you're not sure whether you're going to make it? Would it be better if you put that same amount of time, those hours, that dedication, and all of the effort into something else that might not require that much of your time, and that can make you a good amount of money and a good living? You might not make millions of dollars, but guess what? If you get a heart attack or a cardiac arrest while studying to become a doctor, guess what you could do once you recover? You could continue to study to be a doctor. In other words, a cardiac arrest is not going to stop you from pursuing your career. It's not. So you got to ask yourself, is this even worth it? Does it make sense to put my life on the line for these things? Can I dedicate my time and my hours to other things that will have a greater return on investment as far as the longevity of everything, right? Because once you become a plumber, there's so much more opportunities for you. Once you become a doctor, there's so much more opportunities from you. And not just at the point where you have to retire after 3 or 4 years in professional sports, or retire after 10 years. Because after 10 years, you're only 30 years old. You have a long life ahead of you, and you have no idea what to do after that because you don't have the skills, because you spent all of those decades learning to become a basketball player or a football player. So you have to ask yourself, is this the right path that I want to be on, and whether or not there's other viable professions that are actually easier to get into, that is actually better for you and your family, and is not going to place your health in jeopardy. So keep that in mind. I'm pretty sure LeBron James and his wife is going to keep that in mind as well too when they make their decision, because at the end of the day, Bronny doesn't have to play or work or dedicate any of that time to something that could take his life. He doesn't have to do any of those things. He has not just a choice, he has a plethora of choices. And I'm sure whatever he decides to do, he's going to be successful. He's going to have the backing of his family to support him. And if he doesn't want to play basketball anymore, if he makes an announcement saying that he's not going to play basketball anymore, it wouldn't surprise me, because for a guy like Bronny James and the family that he comes from, the opportunities are endless. So you let me know how you feel about the story, whether you agree or disagree with me. Leave in the comments section, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Until next time, part of my presence YouTube channel, next move, best move. And I hope Bronny James makes his next move his best move. Peace.